The sun dipped low behind the hills. It cast long shadows across Hobbiton. Tansy knelt in her garden. Her fingers were buried in the cool earth. She pulled weeds from between rows of vibrant herbs. Lavender swayed gently in the breeze. It released its sweet fragrance. She inhaled deeply, but it didn't quell the ache that gnawed at her. "Hey, Tansy." A familiar voice broke through her thoughts. It was Beryl, a neighbour and fellow hobbit. She strolled down the path with a basket at her side. "You've got quite the jungle here." Tansy glanced up. She brushed dirt from her hands. "It's not a jungle, it's organised chaos," Beryl chuckled. "Looks like a fine chaos to me. You should be proud of your remedies. Folks say you can cure anything from a cough to a broken heart." "They say that," Tansy muttered. She stood and wiped her hands on her apron. "It doesn't feel like enough." "Not enough?" Beryl raised an eyebrow. She leaned against the fence post. "You save lives with those potions of yours, or what more do you want?" "I want..." Tansy hesitated. She looked past Beryl to the rolling hills. Those hills cradled Hobbiton. "I want to see what's out there, beyond these fields and gardens." Beryl crossed her arms. Concern etched lines across her forehead. "Out there? You mean adventures? You've got all you need right here." "Need?" Tansy laughed bitterly. She plucked a sprig of thyme, then let it fall back into the soil. "I've spent years gathering herbs and helping others. I know how to mix oils and concoct salves, but what about living?" Beryl straightened up. She glanced around as if searching for something hidden in the landscape. "Look at those travellers." Tansy gestured toward the distant road. A pair of figures ambled closer. Dust kicked up around their boots. They seemed full of stories untold. Beryl followed her gaze. Then she shook her head slowly. "They're just passing through." "They're free," Tansy insisted. "Free to roam wherever they choose." Beryl opened her mouth but closed it again. It seemed she was considering something deeper than mere words. "What if you joined them?" she finally suggested. An edge of mischief crept into her tone. "Join them?" Tansy's heart raced at the thought. "Yes, grab your bag and go." Beryl's eyes sparkled with excitement. "I can't just leave." The protest slipped out before she could catch it. "Why not?" "Who says you have to stay put?" Tansy looked down at her garden again. Each plant represented a piece of herself she'd nurtured and grown. Yet every time she glanced towards a freedom beyond those hills, they seemed so far away. The bell above the door jingled. A customer entered Tansy's shop. It was a quaint little place. It was filled with the rich scents of dried herbs and flowers. She arranged jars on a shelf. Each jar was labelled with elegant script: chamomile, sage, valerian. "Good morning, Mrs. Puddifoot," Tansy called out. The plump hobbit shuffled to the counter. "Morning, dear." "Just here for my usual," Mrs. Puddifoot replied. She peered at the jars like they held hidden treasures. "You know I can't sleep without that lavender you brew." Tansy smiled. She reached for a jar on the top shelf. Her fingers brushed against the smooth glass. "Have you ever thought about what lies beyond our hills?" she asked while measuring out a generous scoop of lavender. Mrs. Puddifoot chuckled. "Beyond? Why would I want to leave? Everything I need is right here in Hobbiton." Tansy poured the fragrant buds into a small paper bag. Then she tied it with twine. "But think of it, vast forests, towering mountains." maybe even mythical lands filled with magic and wonder. Magic? Mrs. Puddifoot shook her head with a laugh. You've been reading too many of those tales again. I can't help it, Tansy sighed. Her mind drifted back to the stories of her childhood. I dream of those enchanted places sometimes, like Eldergrove Forest or Crystal Caverns. You'd miss your garden, Mrs. Puddifoot insisted. She tucked her purchase into her apron pocket. Maybe, Tansy admitted. She leaned against the counter, then wiped her hands on her apron. But wouldn't it be grand to see them for myself? To find out if they really exist? Another customer entered, and it was Elliot Brambleberry. He was a sprightly young hobbit. He had tousled hair and an ever-present grin. Got any good news today? He asked. He eyed Tansy eagerly. Oh, just daydreaming about far-off lands, she said with a playful roll of her eyes. Far-off lands, count me in. I've got my backpack ready. Elliot leaned forward on the counter. Excitement sparked in his eyes. Let's go on an adventure. Tansy laughed softly. But she felt that familiar flutter in her chest. And what would we find there? Treasure? Danger? Who cares? Elliot grinned. It's about the journey. Just imagine exploring uncharted territory. The words hung in the air. They were like fragrant smoke from burning herbs. They ignited something deep within Tansy's heart. She watched Elliot's enthusiasm spill over into the room. The scent of roasted vegetables filled the air. Tansy sat down at the long wooden table. Her father, a stout hobbit with silver-streaked hair, beamed at her from across the table. The flickering candlelight cast warm shadows. It filled their modest dining room, but Tansy could feel an undercurrent of tension. Proud of you, my girl, her father said. He lifted his cup in a toast. You've turned this garden into something magical. Thanks, Dad, Tansy smiled. Warmth spread through her chest. I just do what I love. He set his cup down. He leaned forward slightly. But love's not enough to live on forever, you know. His gaze held hers firmly. You're not getting any younger. Her heart sank at the familiar conversation. Dad, I'm happy, she replied carefully. She picked at a roasted carrot on her plate. But what about settling down, starting a family? His brow furrowed slightly, as if the very thought troubled him. Tansy pressed her lips together. She forced back the frustration bubbling inside. I don't think I'm ready for that yet. She took a deep breath. There's so much I want to see and do. He sighed, his shoulders slumped a little. Adventure is all well and good, he said slowly. But it won't be there forever. What if you miss your chance? What chance? Tansy shot back before catching herself. She forced a smile instead. Life doesn't have to follow a strict path, does it? Her father studied her for a moment. Then he shrugged with an almost defeated air. I just want what's best for you. I know, she stirred the food on her plate absently. But I don't want to give up my dreams for someone else's expectations. Dreams are fine, he said gently. Concern laced his voice. But dreams won't bring you home when you need support. When you want companionship. Tansy felt her pulse quicken. She wrestled with his words. Companionship tugged at her heartstrings. She longed for it alongside her desire for adventure. Maybe one day, she murmured finally. You don't have to rush into anything. he reassured her. He nodded with understanding and she nodded back. But she remained unconvinced. She glanced out the window. The sprawling fields lay beyond their home. Those fields were the same ones she'd known all her life. Yet they felt so stifling in this moment. The next morning, Tansy left her shop. The scent of herbs lingered on her fingers. The sun shone brightly overhead. It cast a golden hue over Hobbiton. She made her way to the library. Its familiar stone facade offered comfort. It also brought a sense of nostalgia. As she stepped inside, the musty scent enveloped her. Old paper and leather bindings filled the air. Dust motes danced in the sunlight. The light filtered through the high windows. It illuminated rows of aging volumes. These books stood sentinel along the shelves. Each spine whispered stories long forgotten. Tansy traced her fingers along the shelves. She felt the rough texture of worn leather. She paused at a particularly faded book. Its title was barely legible. The Travels of Faraway Lands, it read. The gold lettering was dulled by time. A rush of warmth flooded through her. Memories resurfaced from her childhood. She recalled evenings spent nestled in a corner. Those evenings were filled with tales of adventure. "Thought I'd find you here," came a voice from behind her. She turned to see Old Man Bilbo. His silver hair caught the light. It looked like strands of spun gold. His twinkling eyes sparkled with mischief. "I figured you'd be lost in those dusty pages," he continued. He chuckled softly. "Just looking for inspiration," Tansy replied with a smile. "There's something magical about these books." Bilbo nodded. His gaze swept over the shelves. He seemed to see the stories unfurling before him. "These old tomes have seen better days," he said. "But they hold treasures within." He gestured toward an ornate volume on a nearby table. "Have you read this one?" he asked. "It's about the elves and their hidden realms." Tansy stepped closer to inspect it. She ran her fingers over its gilded edges. "I remember hearing stories about them," she said. Her heart raced at the thought of enchanted forests. She imagined shimmering lakes filled with mysteries. "You should take it home," Bilbo suggested. He leaned against a shelf. There was an air of wisdom about him. It belied his age. "Really?" she asked, surprise dancing into her voice. "Aye." "Let it fuel your imagination," he replied. He winked at her. "You never know where those stories might lead." She hesitated only briefly, then she nodded resolutely. Tansy pulled the book from its resting place. She cradled it in her arms. It felt like a long-lost friend. "Thanks, Bilbo," she said. Her smile widened. Anticipation bloomed within her chest. It was a small flicker against the backdrop of routine life. Tansy settled into a cosy nook. The map of the elves was still cradled in her arms. She flipped through the pages of the tome. Each leaf crackled softly beneath her fingers. Dust danced in the beams of sunlight. She scanned for anything that might stir her imagination. A flicker of light caught her eye. It shimmered between two worn pages. Intrigued, she paused and leaned closer. Tansy gently pried the pages apart. She revealed a hidden slide nestled within the spine of the book. Her heart raced as she pulled it free. It was a delicate piece of parchment. It was adorned with intricate runes and lively sketches. The faint scent of pine wafted from it. It was a fresh aroma. It contrasted with the musty library air. Tansy's breath caught in her throat. "By the Shire," she whispered. She felt mesmerised. The map depicted a lush expanse. It was the Heartwood, vibrant and alive. Its trees stretched toward an azure sky. Tiny figures danced along winding paths. They were elves adorned in flowing garments. They celebrated beneath canopies draped in leaves like emerald jewels. Each stroke revealed details that ignited something deep within her. She traced one of the swirling paths with her fingertip. An inexplicable pull drew her in. It was as if the map beckoned her to follow its lines. The runes glimmered faintly under her touch, their meanings teased at the edge of her understanding. "Where have you been hiding?" Tansy murmured to herself. Bilbo ambled over. He peered at what had captured her attention so completely. "Ah! The Heartwood! That's a rare find indeed." His eyes widened with genuine interest. He leaned closer to inspect it. "It feels alive," Tansy said. She couldn't mask her excitement. "I've never seen anything like this." Bilbo chuckled softly. "Legends say it's enchanted. An ancient place where time flows differently and magic thrives." Tansy felt a rush of warmth course through her veins. What if it's real? Her mind raced with possibilities. "Many seek it out," Bilbo replied. He stroked his chin thoughtfully. "Few return unchanged." Tansy's gaze drifted back to the map, determination hardening in her chest like iron. The allure of adventure wrapped around her. It felt like a warm cloak, a promise waiting just beyond reach. Tansy flipped to a new page. Her fingers trembled with anticipation. The words leaped out at her. They shimmered in the dim light. She read about the Heartwood's legendary abilities. Its essence could heal wounds. It could heal entire hearts. Tales told of ancient trees. They whispered secrets. They granted wisdom to those who listened. "Revive something pure and beautiful," she murmured. Warmth bloomed within her chest. Each line ignited a spark. It pushed away the weight of her long burdening expectations. "Looks like it's more than just a pretty picture," Bilbo observed. He leaned over her shoulder to glimpse the text. "The Heartwood holds great power. Many believe it can restore lost dreams, can bring clarity to wandering souls." Tansy's heart raced. She envisioned herself among towering trees. Their leaves rustled with secrets, secrets waiting to be uncovered. The thought of such a quest ignited her spirit. It felt like fire catching kindling. "I've spent too long trapped in this shop," she said. She was half lost in reverie. "What if this journey is what I've been searching for?" Bilbo nodded knowingly. A hint of mischief danced in his eyes. "Adventure often finds those who seek it, Tansy. But the road isn't always kind." "I'm tired of waiting for life to happen," she replied. A resolute edge crept into her voice. "I want to experience it." His brow arched slightly. He studied her face. "Just remember, sometimes it's not the destination. It's what you find along the way that shapes you." Tansy paused. She absorbed his words. They sank in like sunlight soaking into soil. The prospect of venturing into the unknown filled her with excitement. It also filled her with fear. A familiar duality always accompanied dreams. "What if I fail?" she questioned softly. Deep down, she knew failure felt better than stagnation. "Every great adventure comes with risks," Bilbo offered. He gave her a gentle smile. "You've got heart and skill. Trust in yourself." Tansy returned his gaze. Determination hardened within her resolve. She looked back at the map. She imagined every step through lush undergrowth. She pictured every sound of leaves crunching underfoot. A world was waiting just for her. Her thoughts raced. Possibilities unfurled before her, like branches reaching toward the sky. Tansy stood in her garden, the cool night air wrapped around her like a soft blanket. Stars glittered above her. They formed a tapestry of dreams waiting to be touched. The gentle rustle of leaves accompanied her thoughts. She traced the outline of the familiar herbs around her. Sage, lavender, and thyme reminded her of home. She recalled tales her father spun. He spoke of brave explorers who traversed uncharted lands. They faced dragons and forged friendships with strange creatures. They sought treasures, not for wealth, but for the thrill of discovery. Her heart swelled at the thought of those adventurers. They chased sunsets and tasted magic in every breath. A breeze swept through the garden. It carried the scent of blooming night jasmine. Tansy closed her eyes and inhaled deeply. The aroma awakened something deep inside her. It was a yearning that whispered to her spirit, "Why can't I be one of them?" She spoke into the quiet night. She dared the stars to listen. "Why shouldn't I find my own adventure?" She envisioned herself in a vast forest. Sunbeams filtered through emerald leaves. They illuminated paths unexplored. The Heartwood beckoned with its promise of wisdom and wonder. Courage swelled within her chest. It felt as if each star above cheered for her ambition. "What's holding me back?" she asked herself aloud. She glanced at the twinkling sky. It was as if she searched for an answer among the constellations. She stepped closer to a patch of moonlight. It spilled onto the ground, casting delicate shadows across her garden bed. Her fingertips brushed over the soft petals of flowers. They glowed silver under the celestial light. "Life is fleeting," she murmured. She recalled a lesson from those family tales. The most remarkable moments lay just beyond one's comfort zone. Determination surged like fire through her veins. "I will explore," she declared into the stillness. "I will become part of those stories." Tansy tilted her head back. She gazed at Orion winking down at her. Each star felt like a promise. It was a reminder that adventure awaited anyone brave enough to seize it. Her heart raced. She envisioned packing herbs and provisions for a journey. It would be beyond Hobbiton's borders. Each item represented both necessity and possibility. With a deep breath, Tansy stepped inside her cozy hobbit hole. The warmth wrapped around her like a comforting embrace. She found her writing desk. It was cluttered with parchment and ink pots. The flickering candlelight danced across the surface. She sat down, her heart racing. "Dear Father," she began, the quill scratched against the parchment. "I hope this letter finds you well." She paused. She tapped the feather against her chin. She considered how to frame her words. "I've made a decision that may surprise you." Her stomach twisted at the thought of his reaction, but she pressed on. "I intend to seek out the Heartwood and uncover its secrets." She believed this journey would enrich her knowledge of herbs and healing. These were skills she could bring back home. Tansy took a moment to gather her thoughts. Her brow furrowed in concentration. "I promise I will return with newfound wisdom," she wrote. She felt the weight of each word. This isn't merely an escape, it's an opportunity for growth. She folded the letter carefully. She sealed it with a bit of wax from the candle. Guilt nipped at her conscience. Her father had always relied on her presence at home. But excitement surged within her like bubbling brook water. Setting aside the letter, Tansy rummaged through her shelves. They were lined with jars filled with dried herbs and colourful powders. Each container held memories and dreams. She could almost hear their whispers urging her to pack wisely. She grabbed small bundles of dried lavender for calming teas. She picked sprigs of rosemary for protection against misfortune. Next, she took chamomile for soothing ailments, and yarrow for strength, an arsenal for healing and survival. As she meticulously arranged everything in a worn leather satchel, she glanced toward a corner. Her father's sturdy dagger rested on display. It was a family heirloom passed down through generations. Its blade gleamed in the candlelight. It called to her. She hesitated. But then she reached for it, feeling its weight in her hand. This dagger could serve as both a tool and a symbol. It represented courage and determination. After tucking it securely into the bag alongside provisions of bread and cheese, Tansy paused again. A pang of guilt threaded through her excitement. The life she was leaving behind felt secure. Yet it was stifling at times. Would they understand? Would they wait for her return? Before dawn's first light crept over the hills, Tansy stood at her door. Her heart raced. The world lay cloaked in hushed silence. It was broken only by the soft rustle of leaves in the cool breeze. She took a deep breath. Her lungs filled with the earthy scent of dew-kissed grass and wildflowers. "Here goes nothing," she whispered to herself. She stepped into the soft glow of morning light. Her satchel felt heavy against her side, but excitement surged within her. She turned back for one last look at her beloved Shire. The round doors of Hobbit holes nestled into the rolling hills stood still. It was as if they too were holding their breath. Tansy let her gaze wander over the lush greenery. This was the land that had cradled her since childhood. She thought of warm laughter shared around family meals. Evenings spent with friends under twinkling stars came to mind. Each memory painted a picture in her mind. Some were bright with joy, others shaded with longing. "Goodbye for now," she murmured. She clutched the strap of her satchel tighter. Then she stepped onto the winding path that led away from home. Each footfall felt heavier than the last. But with every step forward, a flicker of resolve ignited within her. The path twisted through familiar fields, rabbits darted here and there, birds began their morning songs. She imagined their melodies, carried on winds that would guide her into new adventures. Anticipation buzzed in her chest. It mingled uneasily with trepidation. What will I find out there? She mused aloud. Her voice barely broke the stillness around her. As she ventured further from home, shadows stretched behind her. Like ghosts bidding farewell, they lingered. Tansy focused on each stride. She let memories fade into whispers. Dreams of distant lands filled her thoughts. Visions of towering trees danced before her eyes. Sparkling streams awaited her exploration. The sky blushed pink. Dawn unfolded its arms to embrace another day. A thrill coursed through Tansy at the thought of discovery. Yet uncertainty lingered like mist in the air. She shook it off. Adventure always demanded courage, and she had that in abundance. Her heart raced as she approached a fork in the path ahead. The path twisted and turned. It led Tansy deeper into the woods, the scent of pine mixed with the earth. She moved with purpose. Then a sudden rustle caught her attention. Curiosity piqued. She slowed her pace. She peered through the thicket. There, just beyond a cluster of ferns, stood Pippin Greenhill. He was an old acquaintance from her youth. His back faced her as he fiddled with jars. The jars were filled with colourful liquids. Sunlight caught the tips of his curly hair. It framed him in a golden halo. "Pippin!" Tansy called out. She stepped closer. He spun around. His eyes widened in surprise. "Tansy? I didn't expect to see you here." A grin broke across his face, but it faltered as he glanced at his workspace. "What brings you so far from Hobbiton?" "I'm off on an adventure," she replied. She tried to sound more confident than she felt. "Adventure?" He raised an eyebrow. Amusement danced in his gaze. "You? What happened to your herbs and remedies?" "Still love them," she shrugged. "But there's more out there waiting for me." Pippin gestured toward his jars. "Speaking of waiting, I've been working on something myself." He lifted one jar. Its contents swirled ominously. A deep green liquid glimmered like emeralds in the sun. Herb-based poisons, a little side project. Tansy stepped closer. She was intrigued yet cautious. "Poison? Isn't that dangerous?" "Only if you don't know what you're doing," he chuckled softly. But then a flicker of seriousness crossed his face. "It's just... sometimes I wonder if I'm meant for more than this." "What do you mean?" She leaned against a tree trunk. Pippin ran a hand through his hair. Frustration etched lines on his forehead. "I've spent so long honing my skills with this bow and these plants, chasing dreams that never really took flight." He waved dismissively at the jars. He added quietly, "Just like everyone else around here." She studied him for a moment. He wore the weight of unfulfilled aspirations like a cloak. Tansy felt an unexpected kinship. Two souls restless for something beyond their small corner of the world. "You can come with me," she suggested impulsively. His gaze sharpened. Curiosity ignited behind those familiar eyes. "Where are you headed?" Pippin crossed his arms. Skepticism knitted his brow. "A journey like yours? That's a recipe for trouble, Tansy. You think you can just wander off into the wild like some hero from a storybook?" "Why not?" she shot back. The heat of her ambition rose. "You've heard the tales. The Heartwood holds secrets and magic. It could be everything I've ever dreamed of." He shook his head. His lips curled into a teasing smirk. "Magic? In your wildest dreams, maybe. You really believe a handful of herbs and an old map will lead you to adventure? Sounds like something out of a child's bedtime story." Tansy clenched her fists. She bit back her frustration. "It's more than that. The Heartwood represents everything we've been missing here: beauty, wonder, possibilities." She took a breath to steady herself. She was determined not to let him dismiss her. Pippin leaned against a nearby tree. He tapped his fingers against its rough bark. "And what about your shop? Your family? You can't just run off because you read some dusty old book." "Every day feels the same," she replied. Desperation crept into her voice. "I want to break free from all this. This predictability. The Heartwood is real. It could change everything." He watched her closely. His teasing faltered. Curiosity seeped through his facade. What makes it so special? She straightened up. Excitement bubbled beneath the surface. It's said that the Heartwood can heal not just wounds, but also lost dreams. Imagine walking among trees that whisper secrets or finding herbs with powers beyond our understanding. Sounds enchanting, he admitted. He arched an eyebrow, though he still wore a skeptical grin. Tansy pressed on. Emboldened by his glimmer of interest, she said, "We could find creatures no one else has seen or revive ancient traditions lost to time. What if there are wonders waiting just for us?" His expression softened for a moment. He pondered her words, but he broke the spell with another chuckle. "And what if you run into trolls or worse? Adventure sounds great until it bites back." "I'm prepared," she insisted. "I have my herbs and my wits." Pippin scoffed playfully, but he couldn't hide the flicker of intrigue in his eyes as he leaned forward slightly. Tansy planted her hands on her hips. Determination sparkled in her eyes. "All right, let's make this interesting. If I can uncover something extraordinary about this map within a day, you have to come with me on my adventure." Pippin raised an eyebrow. A grin crept onto his face. "And if you can't?" "I'll help you perfect that dreadful concoction of yours," she replied, crossing her arms defiantly. "Dreadful? It's a masterpiece in the making," he feigned offence. Laughter danced in his voice. "But I'll take that bet." "Deal." Tansy extended her hand. Pippin grasped it firmly. They sealed their pact with a smirk. "All right then, what's your plan?" he asked, leaning back against the tree. The light-hearted banter sparked mischief in him. She brushed her fingers over the map's edges. Ancient runes twisted and turned like vines. "First, I'll study these symbols closely. There has to be something hidden here, something beyond just directions." "Think you'll decode the secrets of the universe while you're at it?" "Oh," Pippin chuckled. "Very funny," she shot back. She rolled her eyes but couldn't suppress a smile. "Seriously though, there might be clues about the Heartwood, or even hidden paths leading there. If I can crack these codes before sundown. And if not," he interjected with mock seriousness, "you're stuck in my workshop until you brew me the perfect potion." Tansy nodded playfully. "You may want to prepare for an epic journey instead." "I wouldn't hold my breath." Pippin flicked a twig from the ground toward her. Laughter bubbled between them. It was like the bubbling cauldron they often used. Tansy took a step back. Her eyes narrowed playfully as she clutched the map tightly. "You might underestimate me, but I've always had a knack for finding extraordinary things." "Or getting yourself into trouble," he quipped. With newfound determination coursing through her veins, Tansy unfolded the map fully. She scanned its delicate lines and curves. The ink glimmered in the sunlight. She traced one intricate rune with her fingertip. "Look at this," she said suddenly. "This symbol here, it resembles a flowering plant from my garden. It could mean something significant." Pippin leaned closer, intrigue etched on his face. "Really? That could be worth exploring. It could lead us to something special," she mused aloud. The thrill of discovery sent a shiver down her spine. Ideas spun in her mind like autumn leaves caught in a breeze. "You better hurry then," he teased gently. Tansy stepped cautiously into the old forest. A chill wrapped around her like an unwelcome cloak. The sunlight dwindled behind the dense canopy. Patches of shadow danced on the ground. Feels different in here, Pippin muttered. He glanced around as the trees loomed tall and ancient, their gnarled branches twisted overhead. They bent as if they had a mind of their own. Almost like they're watching us, Tansy replied. Her voice was low. The silence was heavy. It pressed against her ears. They moved deeper. Each footfall was muffled by a thick layer of leaves and moss. A soft mist began to creep along the path. It curled around their ankles like ghostly fingers. "Do you think we'll find anything?" Pippin asked. His tone was light, but his eyes darted between the trunks. "Something extraordinary," she said. She spoke with more conviction than she felt. The air thickened with unease. She scanned the fog-shrouded path ahead. It wound away into darkness. Shadows flickered in her peripheral vision. A sudden rustle nearby made them both freeze. "What was that?" Pippin whispered. He stepped closer to Tansy. "I don't know." She squinted into the gloom. Her heart raced. "Just keep moving." The trees seemed to lean in closer as they walked on. Branches twisted and creaked ominously above them. Tansy brushed a hand against a nearby trunk. It felt unnaturally warm beneath her fingers. "Maybe we should turn back," Pippin suggested. He shifted his weight from one foot to another. His bravado wavered under the weight of the forest's presence. "No way!" Tansy insisted. Doubt flickered in her mind. It felt like a candle in a drafty room. "We've come this far." Even as she spoke, uncertainty gnawed at her gut. The path ahead narrowed and dipped into a hollow. It seemed to swallow sound itself. The mist thickened further. It wrapped around them until visibility dropped to mere feet. Pippin glanced back over his shoulder. He frowned deeply now. "It feels wrong in here. It's just different." Tansy forced herself to take another step forward. But she hesitated. An unsettling rustle echoed through the trees once more. A low growl reverberated from somewhere deeper within the fog. "Did you hear that?" Pippin's voice tightened with alarm. "Yes!" Her pulse quickened. Dread settled like stones in her stomach. The forest felt alive. Alive and hungry for something beyond their presence. The deeper they ventured, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. Dark whispers curled around their ankles. They rose from the earth like smoke from a dying fire. Tansy felt her heart race. Each beat echoed in her ears as shadows danced along the edges of her vision. "Did you hear that?" Pippin's voice cracked. It broke the heavy silence. He took a half step back. His bravado faltered under the weight of unseen eyes. "It's just the wind," Tansy replied. Her own confidence wavered. She forced herself to look ahead. The path twisted and turned into an abyss of shadow. "We can't turn back now." Pippin clenched his fists at his sides, his shoulders tensed. "This isn't right," he said. "I thought we were looking for adventure, not whatever this is." His words came out clipped, edged with anxiety. "Maybe we're not supposed to find anything here," she muttered. She bit back regret. Forever stepping into this cursed place. She had chased a dream, an adventure that now felt. More like a reckless whim. The whispers grew louder. They swirled around them like an angry storm. Each word was indistinct yet haunting. It tugged at her mind and pulled her deeper into unease. "Look!" Pippin pointed ahead. His eyes were wide with fear. What's that? A flicker of movement caught Tansy's attention. From between two ancient trees a figure emerged. It was draped in shadows, its features were obscured, and shifting like smoke caught in a breeze. The air grew thick. With an electric charge, it made her skin crawl. "Stay back," she warned. She instinctively reached for the dagger strapped to her waist. "What do we do?" Pippin's voice shook. He glanced over his shoulder, toward the path they had come from. "We should go." "No." Tansy stood firm, despite her racing heart. The figure seemed to pulse with energy. It was drawing them in, as if it held secrets meant only for their ears. What if it's dangerous? Pippin took a step closer to her. His eyes darted between the figure and Tansy. "I don't know," she admitted quietly. She wrestled with the growing fear gripping her chest. "But I can't walk away without understanding what this is." The shadows writhed closer. They seemed to beckon them forward. Tansy took a deep breath. Each second stretched painfully thin between them and whatever lurked ahead. The shadows pressed closer. They twisted around the trees. They looked like dark tendrils eager to ensnare them. Tansy felt their cold whispers curling around her thoughts. Each whisper echoed her deepest fears. "You're not enough. You'll fail. You'll be alone forever." "Stop it!" Pippin shouted. He clenched his jaw. He stumbled backward and bumped into a gnarled tree. "We have to go!" But Tansy stood rooted in place. She recalled the tales of bravery she had read as a child. Heroes faced their fears head-on. They emerged stronger. She remembered how they confronted dragons. They traversed treacherous paths. They were fueled by courage and camaraderie. "We're not afraid of you," she yelled. Her voice cut through the oppressive darkness like a blade. The shadows flickered. They were momentarily stunned by her defiance. Pippin blinked at her in surprise. "Tansy?" "Together," she insisted. She locked eyes with him. A rush of determination surged through her veins. "We can't let them win." He took a shaky breath. He nodded slowly. With a renewed resolve, they moved closer together. The whispers intensified. So did their willpower. It swelled like an unstoppable tide. "On 3, Tansy said. She gripped her dagger tightly. It felt like an anchor against the storm. 1, 2, 3. They charged forward into the dark mass of swirling shadows. Tansy swung her dagger wildly. She cut through the whispers that threatened to drag them down. Pippin followed closely behind. He shouted a war cry that echoed through the forest. The shadows recoiled from their combined strength. They retreated as if burned by their fierce light. The air crackled with energy. They pushed through the darkness that threatened to engulf them. Tansy felt Pippin's presence beside her. His heartbeat synced with hers. They raced for freedom. Together they fought against doubt and fear. They were a pair of kindred spirits. Adversity had drawn them closer. They burst through a final barrier of trees. They entered an open clearing bathed in moonlight. They collapsed onto the grass, gasping for breath. "Did we really just do that?" Pippin asked between breaths. Disbelief painted his features. Tansy glanced back at the shadows lurking behind them. "We did," she replied softly. A sense of triumph filled her chest. They had escaped together. They were stronger than before,